Welcome back to Sprague Homestead on another 4-H Friday. I'm Nikki, and today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of breeding versus buying your meat pens. So every year around this time, I start getting a lot of emails from parents wondering if it's worth the time to invest in a breeding doe and actually breeding their child's meat pens, or if they should just contact a breeder and go ahead and buy them. Now, it very much depends on your situation, but I will start by saying that I always think it's in the kid's best interest to learn as much animal husbandry and care as possible when they're doing these pens and doing any kind of 4-H project. So I am a big proponent of the fact that you should probably be breeding your own pens. There's a lot to be said there. There's a lot to be learned there. But not all kids are mature enough to handle it. If your kids cannot handle the idea of death, maybe you're better off buying a pen. Keep in mind that not every kit makes it, right? So you might have a beautiful litter of 10 or 12 rabbits and maybe a first-time mom that puts them on the wire. Maybe a couple of them die, stillborns, there's a lot of things that can happen there. So it really does depend on the temperament of your kid. But there's a huge advantage in that having a litter gives you more options to make a pen of 3 that really matches what we're talking about in terms of judging. And what have we talked about before? Uniformity, consistency. That is the purpose of the meat pen. So being able, especially with these pens of 3, to breed your own gives you the bigger window to make a really nice matching pen. When you go and you buy from a breeder, oftentimes you're getting 3, maybe 4, because sometimes they'll give you a spare. So you're getting 3 or 4 rabbits, and how they look at 4 or 5, 6 weeks, whatever it is that you're buying them at, may not be at all how consistent they are by the time fair market rolls around, right? Rabbits grow at different rates, especially once they're weaned and they're away from mom. Bullies will emerge, especially if you're caging them together. But does and bucks will grow at different rates. So if you can have an entire litter of 10, 12, 14 rabbits, maybe there's only 6. It really does depend. You at least have more options to try and pick out that consistency. The other part of that, of course, is if a rabbit dies, you have backups. Whereas with purchasing from a breeder, if the dog gets in and kills 2 rabbits and you started with 4, now you don't have a pen. You can go on and do singles, but a lot of kids don't want to do that. They want to do the pen of 3, which is considered the pinnacle class. It's a tougher class, and that's where a lot of kids want to go into. So now you're not being able to make that pen of 3. Or if you started with 3 rabbits and 1 spontaneously died, it does happen. Again, now you're down into single class. So having that whole litter at home does give you the biggest amount of options. Now, on the flip side of this, a huge con of this is space. If you're going to breed your own, then you need a space for mom. And maybe dad. A lot of times you can get 4-H leaders if they've got a meat breed to breed your doe for you, but not always, especially in these times where we're dealing with RHD throughout the country and whatnot. But you at least need a spot for mom. You're going to need a spot for your rabbits that you're doing your markman. Personally, I like to see them all in their own cages. And then whatever you're not using for market, you're going to have cages for them as well. So it can be kind of a big setup. Along with that comes time. If you're buying your market pen, a lot of times, depending on the fair and depending on the 4-H, you might be able to buy them as late as 7 weeks. Sometimes they make you have them by the time they're 4 and 5 weeks. So it's a shorter term, right? You're going to sell them by the time they're less than 100 days, usually, if you're doing a fryer class. So you don't have them for very long. It's a couple months investment, and you move on with your life. If you're breeding your own, you've got to have them at least 130 to 140 days. And that's if you pick up mom from somebody already bred and practically on the brink of birthing. So you do have to think about what you have time for. In this day and age of kids having lots of clubs and, sporting activities and that kind of stuff, they may not have the time to run a longer program. With that also comes resources. Supporting a doe and all the extra rabbits that are going to be born in this litter costs money. And if that's a huge sticking point for you, you might want to just go ahead and buy a pen of 3 or 4. These are all things that you have to kind of be thinking about on the front end before you get all the way to the fair. And the last thing that you need to be thinking about is, what are you going to do with any excess rabbits? This can be a huge pro or a huge con depending on where you are on it. If you are a family that don't mind butchering and eating your excess rabbits, having your own litter is great, because you might have, anywhere from 3 to 7 extra babies to be able to grow out and then eventually butcher for yourself. If that's not what you want to do, you need to figure out where you're going to put those rabbits, right? So sometimes animal rehab centers, rescues, zoos, the like will take donations. Sometimes they won't. In some areas, you can put them up on Craigslist, sell them for $10 a piece to somebody who is willing to butcher and eat them, and then it's easy peasy. Do not count on selling them as pets. A lot of people go into it and then they get stuck with them. Pretty soon they're all, trying to breed each other in cages, and it becomes a nightmare. So have a good outlet for them first before you make that big decision. Sometimes you'll find other kids in the 4-H classes that want them, or maybe you've got other kids that make a deal with a breeder and then the breeder's doe didn't take. So sometimes you can sell them off to other kids in your 4-H program for their own market pens. So those are the things to be thinking about, some of the pros and cons of raising your own. If you have other questions, leave them down at the bottom. You can always send me an email at srhomestead@yahoo.com. That is it this week for 4-H Friday. We will see you next week. Happy homesteading.